My ungrateful son refused to pay, so I froze their accounts mid-vacation. True story. Have you ever loved someone so fiercely, so unconditionally, that you let them walk all over you, until one day, you simply couldn't anymore? Can you imagine a moment when the child you devoted your life to casts you aside for the person they married? I have. My son, Jasper, was once the light of my life, the very reason I built an empire from the ground up. He was a bright, curious boy, full of life and dreams. I remember his infectious laughter echoing through our home, his hand clutching mine as we navigated the world. He was my purpose, my joy, the future I envisioned. But then, Ravenna came along, and slowly, insidiously, she extinguished that light, turning him into a stranger. A distant, hollowed-out version of the vibrant young man I had raised. But they didn't know I would be the one to write the final chapter of their story. They didn't know that the quiet, unassuming woman they thought they could walk all over still had a fight left in her, and a secret up her sleeve that would change everything. The fluorescent lights of the hospital waiting room hummed, a relentless, cruel counterpoint to the frantic, erratic beating of my heart. Each flicker seemed to mock the chaos inside me. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and stale coffee, a sterile environment that did nothing to calm my spiraling thoughts. The doctor, a young woman with tired but kind eyes, had just given me the news: urgent surgery, significant costs, serious complications if delayed. My mind reeled, tumbling through a labyrinth of fear and disbelief. I was Alara Vance, a woman of means, or at least, I had been. My late husband, Arthur, and I had worked tirelessly, forging our success with sweat, late nights, and an unwavering commitment. We had built Vance Global Trade, a thriving import-export business from scratch, starting with little more than a small office and a phone line, eventually expanding across continents. We invested wisely, diversifying our portfolio, always planning for the future. Our greatest creation, however, wasn't just the business, it was the family trust we'd established, meticulously designed to ensure our children and their children would always have a foundation, a safety net, a bedrock of security. A foundation that, in Jasper and Ravenna's hands, had become a bottomless pit for their extravagant whims, their insatiable desires. It felt like a lifetime ago that I'd handed over the reins, stepping back from the day-to-day operations, trusting them implicitly with what Arthur and I had built, with our legacy. Foolish, I know, utterly naive. But a mother's heart, especially one grieving and longing for family warmth, is often blind, desperate to see the best in those she loves. I remember my hand trembling, shaking so violently I almost dropped the phone as I dialed Jasper's number. My breath caught in my throat, a dry, painful lump. He answered with a sigh, a sound that cut me deeper than any harsh word, as if my call was an utterly inconvenient interruption to his perfect, curated life. Mother? Is everything all right? Ravenna and I are just about to leave for dinner at Le Bijou, you know, that new French place we told you about. Reservations are impossible to get. His tone was clipped, impatient, dripping with an entitlement that made my stomach churn. I swallowed hard, the words catching, sticking like thorns. Jasper, I'm at the hospital. I need urgent surgery, and it's going to be quite expensive. I was hoping, perhaps, that the small repayment I lent Ravenna last year, the one she promised to put back into the trust, it would really help now. Just until I can sort things out. The silence on the other end was deafening, a vast, echoing chasm opening between us, wider than any ocean. Then I heard Ravenna's voice, sharp and undeniably clear in the background, a venomous hiss I knew all too well. Who is it, darling? Your mother again. Is she asking for money again? Good grief, tell her we're busy. My blood ran cold, turning to icy sludge in my veins. Before I could respond, I heard a click, and then Ravenna's voice, amplified, her tone dripping with saccharine sweetness, a deceptive sugar coating over a truly venomous edge. Alara, darling. What's all this about a repayment? Oh, that little loan for my designer handbag. The limited edition Hermès Birkin, remember? I assumed that was a gift, given your generous nature. You know, a little something from your vast fortune to help out your struggling daughter-in-law and son. And now you're suddenly in need of money? For surgery. Honestly, Elara, you're always so financially irresponsible. You founded that trust for our future, Jasper's and mine. Not for you to keep dipping into it for your own emergencies. You had your time to spend your money, your golden years of accumulation are long past. This is our money now, for our life, our travels, our children's education, their elite private schools, their equestrian lessons. Not for your medical bills. You should have planned better. Her words were a physical assault, each one a hammer blow to my already fragile spirit, shattering what little resolve I had left. Financially irresponsible. Me. The woman who built the very fortune they were squandering, who had meticulously managed every penny for decades. My mind flashed back to the countless times I had bailed them out, the hidden debts I'd discovered and quietly settled, the endless demands for more, always more. And Jasper. My son. He was there, I could hear his shallow, almost imperceptible breathing, his utter, profound silence. Not a word in my defense. Not a single, solitary word. He just let her rail at me, let her shame me, let her paint me as some sort of freeloading burden, an inconvenient relic of the past. The silence from him was louder, more painful, more damning, than all of Ravenna's vitriol combined. He sided with her. Without hesitation. Without a thought for my pain, my fear, my very life hanging in the balance. The call ended with Ravenna's triumphant, chillingly polite, "I think it's best we don't discuss this further, Elara. We have plans. You should really learn to manage your own affairs better." Toodles. Click. The line went dead. The silence that followed was even more deafening than the one before. I sat there, the phone heavy, cold in my trembling hand, staring at the sterile hospital wall, tears streaming uncontrollably down my face, hot rivulets carving paths through the dust of my shattered hopes. This was it. This was the final, unforgivable disrespect. The moment when my heart shattered into a million irreparable pieces. And you think this was the first time? Oh, if only. That day at the hospital was merely the culmination, the crescendo of years of quiet suffering, of patient endurance, of a mother's desperate, dying hope that her son would eventually see the truth, would remember the woman who brought him into this world and loved him unconditionally. But he never did. He just drifted further and further away, tethered to Ravenna's every whim like a puppet on a string, dancing to her tune, losing himself in her shadow. It started subtly, as these things always do. Insidious, creeping, like a slow poison. When Jasper first brought Ravenna home, she was charming, almost excessively so, radiating an artificial warmth. Her eyes, usually sharp and calculating, seemed softened, filled with an almost childlike wonder. She had a dazzling smile that she deployed with practiced ease, showering me with compliments on my home, my garden, even my dress. She expressed a seemingly genuine interest in my life, asking about my late husband, about the early days of Vance Global Trade. I remember thinking, finally, Jasper has found someone kind, someone who will appreciate him, who will fill the void Arthur left. My husband had passed away a few years prior, leaving me with a profound loneliness, a quiet ache in my soul. I longed for the warmth of family, the laughter of grandchildren, the simple comfort of shared meals and easy conversation. Ravenna, with her bright, effervescent personality, her promises of future family gatherings and shared holidays, seemed to promise all that, a vibrant new chapter. But beneath the veneer, there was a calculating glint in her eyes, a hunger, an almost predatory gleam that I, in my naive hope and yearning for connection, completely missed. I chose to see what I wanted to see. Soon after their lavish wedding, which, naturally, a significant portion of, if not all of, was funded by the trust, the request started. Not for help, not for advice, not for my wisdom or experience, but for things. A larger house in the most exclusive part of town, then an even larger one. A fancier car, then a fleet of luxury vehicles. Designer clothes, then entire wardrobes, updated seasonally. Jasper, always eager to please, his inherent kindness twisted into a desperate need for approval, indulged her every desire. He was a good man, my son, at his core, but he had a soft heart, a malleable will, and Ravenna exploited it relentlessly, like a master puppeteer pulling strings. "Mother," he'd say, his voice laced with a subtle hint of coercion, "Ravenna found this exquisite antique table from an auction in Tuscany, but it's a bit out of our budget. Could you, perhaps facilitate the acquisition? You know, for the dining room, it would really complete the look of the new house." Or, "Elara, Ravenna simply must have the latest diamond tennis bracelet, all her friends have one, and it would be so embarrassing for her not to. You know, for appearances, for the family name, for the reputation of Vance Global Trade. And I, wanting them to be happy, wanting to be a good mother-in-law, wanting to believe they truly needed these things for their well-being, always obliged." After all, the trust was there, overflowing with funds, diligently managed by Arthur and me. I believed it was for their well-being, their future security, not for their immediate, endless gratification. But they saw it differently. They saw it as their money, already theirs by right, with no connection to the years of sacrifice, the hard work, the careful planning that had built it. It was simply there for them, a magical money tree to pluck from at will. The subtle requests escalated into brazen demands, always wrapped in a veil of casual expectation. When they had their first child, little Lily, my heart swelled with an almost unbearable joy. A granddaughter. The answer to my lonely prayers. I offered to help, to babysit, to cook meals, to be a doting grandmother, to finally experience the family life I yearned for. Ravenna accepted, but with conditions, always conditions. "Mother, could you just run to the organic store across town for these specific organic, imported berries? They're the only ones Lily will eat. And while you're out, could you pick up my dry cleaning? The designer gowns require a special cleaner, you see. Oh, and the house needs a good deep clean, the cleaner cancelled at the last minute, and we have guests coming." I found myself becoming less of a grandmother and more of a glorified maid, a personal assistant without pay or thanks. I would spend hours at their sprawling mansion, a cavernous, opulent place filled with expensive, untouched objects, meticulously cleaning, cooking, running errands, all while Ravenna would lounge by the infinity pool, scrolling through her phone, or entertain her equally vapid friends, sipping champagne and discussing their latest luxury purchases. And Jasper. He would be at work, oblivious to my efforts, or perhaps, deliberately blind. When he was home, he'd barely notice my efforts, or if he did, he'd simply say, "Thanks, Mom, you're the best," with a distracted air, a quick pat on my shoulder, before retreating to his study or joining Ravenna on the patio, lost in their own world. He never once questioned why I was doing so much, why I looked so tired, why my hands were raw from cleaning. He just accepted it, as if it was my natural, expected role, my destiny to serve them. My heart ached for him, for the son who had vanished before my eyes. I remember one particularly humiliating incident, a moment etched into my memory with the sharpness of glass. It was Lily's first birthday party, a grand, over-the-top affair. Ravenna had insisted on a lavish event, inviting hundreds of people, many of whom I didn't even recognize. I spent days baking, decorating, and preparing food, my feet aching, my back sore, all done with love, hoping for a flicker of appreciation. I made Lily's favorite unicorn cake, decorated with such care. On the day of the party, I was bustling around, ensuring everything was perfect, refreshing platters, clearing plates, my apron smeared with flour, my hair coming undone. Ravenna, in a pristine, shimmering designer gown, watched me from afar, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk on her lips. One of her friends, a perfectly coiffed woman named Cynthia, adorned with enough diamonds to fund a small country, approached her, gesturing subtly towards me. I overheard Cynthia whisper, her voice a condescending drawl, "Who's that sweet lady, Ravenna?" "Your caterer. She's quite efficient." Ravenna laughed, a brittle, dismissive sound that echoed in the cavernous room. "Oh, that's just Jasper's mother. Ilara. She loves to help out, you know. Always so eager to be useful. She's just pottering around. Useful. Not loved, not respected, not family. Just, useful. A tool to be employed. My heart sank, a heavy stone in my chest. I glanced at Jasper, who was across the room, laughing loudly with a group of friends, his face flushed with champagne, completely oblivious. He didn't see the humiliation etched on my face. He didn't see the tears welling in my eyes, the sudden blurring of my vision. He never did. He never truly saw me anymore. Years passed, and the pattern only deepened, becoming more entrenched, more painful. Jasper became more and more Ravenna's echo, her shadow, her mouthpiece. If she disapproved of something I said, a gentle piece of advice or a nostalgic memory I shared, he would subtly, or not so subtly, shut me down, change the subject abruptly, or even contradict me directly. If she wanted something from me, a new loan, a new expensive item, a new task, he would pressure me until I gave in, his voice taking on a strangely flat, insistent tone. My opinions were disregarded, my advice scoffed at, my presence tolerated rather than welcomed. They started making grand plans for the trust, for the legacy Arthur and I had built, without ever consulting me, the woman who had created its very foundation. They invested in speculative ventures, often with questionable returns, bought more luxury items, yachts, private jets, exotic animals, it felt like, booked increasingly exotic and lengthy vacations to places I couldn't even pronounce. I tried to voice my concerns, gently at first, my voice laced with caution. Jasper, darling, are you sure that investment in the offshore diamond mine is wise? Your father always advised caution, always preached diversification and stability. He'd wave a dismissive hand, his eyes glazed over, already picturing the next acquisition. Oh, mother, you're so old-fashioned. You don't understand modern finance. Ravenna and I have a top-tier financial advisor. We know what we're doing. The trust is booming. And Ravenna would add, with that infuriating smirk, a glint of pure avarice in her eyes, don't worry, Ilara. We're making sure your money is working hard for us. Just enjoying the fruits of your labor, darling. The implication was clear, your labor, our fruits. It wasn't just the money, though that was a constant, festering wound. It was the emotional neglect, the slow, agonizing erosion of my dignity, my sense of self. I became invisible, a background character in their lavish, superficial lives. My calls went unanswered for days, sometimes weeks. Invitations to family dinners were rare, usually an afterthought, a grudging obligation, and when I did attend, I felt like an outsider, a guest who had overstayed her welcome, a silent observer to their ostentatious displays of wealth and their empty conversations. My grandchildren, Lily and Tom, were growing up, sweet children who showed glimpses of kindness and curiosity, but Ravenna carefully controlled their interactions with me, ensuring I wasn't overly influential. She often told them, in my hearing, about Grandma Ilara's funny old ways, or how I was, a bit forgetful now, subtly undermining my authority, painting me as an aging, senile relic. It was a calculated campaign of infantilization and marginalization, a slow, methodical erasure of my identity. And through it all, Jasper, my son, watched. And said nothing. He simply accepted it, absorbed into Ravenna's orbit, her voice his only guide, his will subsumed by hers. I watched the boy I raised, the man I loved, fade away, replaced by a shell, an echo of the entitled, dismissive woman he had married. The hospital incident, where they refused my desperate, legitimate plea for help, for the very money I had lent them, was not an isolated act of cruelty, it was merely the inevitable culmination of a decade of systematic, calculated disrespect. But they didn't know about the final secret my late husband left me. They didn't know that the quiet, unassuming woman they thought they could walk all over, the woman they dismissed as a doddering old lady, still had a fight left in her, and a secret up her sleeve that would turn their world upside down. My husband, Arthur, bless his foresight, had always been a meticulous man, a visionary, always one step, often 10 steps ahead. He was a man who planned for every contingency, every potential pitfall. When we established the family trust, the Advance Legacy Trust, as he fondly called it, he had insisted on a failsafe, an ultimate protective clause, a set of forgotten but legally binding trustee rights that were buried deep within the original, complex trust deed, signed and notarized decades ago. At the time, I'd barely paid attention, trusting his judgment implicitly, focusing more on the practicalities of our growing business. He had simply said, "Elara, this is our safety net, for all of us, always. And you, my love, will always hold the ultimate key." We had 2 copies of the deed, one with our trusted family lawyer, and one tucked away in a dusty old safety deposit box in a small, obscure bank, almost forgotten after his passing amidst the grief and the complexities of managing his estate. After Arthur died, and I handed over the day-to-day management to Jasper and Ravenna, I had simply trusted them, truly believed they would uphold the spirit of the trust. I had never, in my wildest nightmares, imagined a scenario where I would need to invoke such a clause. Who would ever think their own child and daughter-in-law would be so cruel, so ungrateful, so utterly devoid of compassion? After that humiliating, soul-crushing phone call from the hospital, my heart felt like a shriveled prune, withered and barren. But then, a flicker of something new ignited within me, a cold, hard ember of resolve, a steely determination that hardened my bones. No more. No more silent suffering. No more letting them walk all over me, treating me like a disposable nuisance. As I lay in my hospital bed, recovering from a successful but incredibly expensive surgery, paid for by drawing on my dwindling personal savings, a painful irony, my mind wasn't on my physical pain, which was considerable, but on the deep, festering wound in my soul. They had left me stranded, vulnerable, and dismissed my suffering as an inconvenience to their lavish lifestyle. They were using my money, the money I had painstakingly built, nurtured, and grown for their future, to fund their debauchery, their endless parties, their frivolous whims, while leaving me, the founder, the very source of their wealth, to fend for myself, isolated and dismissed. It was during my recovery, amidst the quiet solitude of my hospital room, that I remembered something my husband had often said, his voice echoing in my memory like a wise whisper from the grave: "Always have an ace in the hole, Elara. Especially when it comes to money and family. People change, and not always for the better." I remembered him talking about how the trust was set up, not just for them to draw from, to be a bottomless well, but for the family's overall well-being, its long-term sustainability, and that as the co-founder and original trustee, I retained certain overriding powers, especially in cases of blatant misuse or if the primary beneficiaries, Jasper and Ravenna, failed to act in the best interest of the trust's long-term sustainability. He had emphasized that my role as founding trustee meant I had an ultimate oversight. I had dismissed it as legal jargon at the time, complex and abstract, but now, every word resonated, each phrase a beacon in my darkness. I called my old family lawyer, Mr. Henderson, a kind, elderly man with a shock of white hair and a perpetually furrowed brow, who had known my husband and me for decades. He had handled all our legal affairs, from our first business contracts to Arthur's will. I told him everything, my voice trembling with a raw mixture of anger, shame, and a burgeoning sense of righteous fury. He listened patiently, his silence a comforting, steady presence, broken only by the occasional thoughtful hum or the scratch of his pen on paper. When I finished, the silence stretched, heavy with unspoken understanding. Then he cleared his throat, a gentle, gravelly sound. "Elara, my dear," he said, his voice soft but firm, "your husband was a brilliant man. A true visionary. He foresaw many things, dear lady. The Vance Legacy Trust Deed, as originally drawn up, gives you explicit, undeniable rights as the primary founding trustee. Rights to review, to audit, and most importantly, to freeze or reallocate funds if the current trustees are found to be acting against the spirit of the trust's initial purpose, or if their actions jeopardize the trust's long-term solvency. This includes any actions deemed to be fiscally irresponsible or, as in your case, failing to uphold the welfare of the founding beneficiary, yourself. It's a dormant power, rarely invoked, a true trump card, but it's there, ironclad, legally unimpeachable. My breath hitched, catching in my throat. A dormant power. A trump card. The irony was almost unbearable, a bitter, satisfying taste in my mouth. They had dismissed me as financially irresponsible, while they were the ones bleeding the trust dry with their reckless, uncontrolled spending. They had forgotten who I was, where the money came from, and more importantly, what legal rights I still held, waiting, dormant, for the precise moment of need. Mr. Henderson explained that while they, as current trustees, had power over daily disbursements and immediate investments, I still had ultimate authority over the principal, the very foundation, and the structure of the trust itself. It meant I could halt all payments, freeze accounts, and even, if necessary, restructure the trust entirely to protect its assets, to save it from their relentless consumption. The sheer magnitude of this revelation sent a jolt of power through me, a sensation I hadn't felt in years. The decision was swift, chillingly clear, unburdened by emotion, fueled by a decade of quiet indignation. I imagined Ravenna's smug face, her dismissive wave of the hand, her glittering, avaricious eyes. I pictured Jasper's silent complicity, his averted gaze, his weakness. I knew they were planning another extravagant trip, a month-long jaunt through Europe, Paris, Venice, the Swiss Alps, the Amalfi Coast, funded entirely by the trust, of course, a final, triumphant display of their unearned wealth, while I was left to recover from surgery, worried about bills, about my future, about the legacy Arthur and I had built. Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice firm, steady, devoid of the tremor that had plagued it for so long, I want to invoke those rights. I want to freeze every single account that is connected to that trust. Effective immediately. I want them to feel every single consequence of their actions, to truly understand what they have done. It wasn't about revenge, not truly, though a part of me, a small, dark corner, relished the thought. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my power, my self-worth. It was about teaching them a lesson they clearly needed to learn, a lesson in accountability and respect. It was about protecting the legacy my husband and I had built, a legacy they were intent on destroying with their recklessness. My heart, once shattered, began to mend, piece by painful piece, fueled by a righteous fire that burned away the last vestiges of my sorrow. And then, the day came. The day everything would be laid bare, the carefully constructed illusion of their lives shattered into a million glittering pieces. Jasper and Ravenna, utterly oblivious, their faces alight with anticipation, boarded their first-class flight to Paris. Their itinerary was packed with Michelin-starred restaurants, where they planned to sample every gourmet delight, luxury shopping sprees on the Champs-Élysées, private tours of the Louvre after hours, and stays in opulent five-star hotels with views of the Eiffel Tower. They had planned to spend weeks gallivanting across Europe, from the romantic canals of Venice, gliding in a private gondola, to the breathtaking Swiss Alps, skiing on pristine slopes, all paid for by the trust they believed was solely theirs, an endless wellspring of wealth. They even sent me a picture from the airport lounge, Ravenna holding up a crystal glass of champagne, her smile wide and self-satisfied, Jasper beaming beside her, his arm draped possessively around her, captioned, "Off to enjoy our future. Wish you were here, but we know you're busy with things." The passive-aggressive tone was unmistakable, a final, unnecessary jab. It fueled my resolve, solidifying my decision. I called Mr. Henderson. "Now," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the years of hurt that had led to this moment. "Initiate the freeze." He confirmed that all necessary paperwork had been filed, all legal notices dispatched to the various banks and investment firms managing the trust accounts, a complex web that had taken days to unravel. The process was entirely legitimate, entirely within my rights as the founding trustee, a legal maneuver Arthur himself had painstakingly ensured. It was like pulling a financial plug, cutting off the very lifeblood they relied on, a sudden, decisive amputation of their wealth. The Zygarnik effect was in full swing for them. The anticipation of a perfect, funded vacation was about to be abruptly interrupted, their minds already filled with the mental checklist of pleasures awaiting them. The curiosity gap would soon be filled with stark, brutal reality. Their first stop was a boutique hotel in the heart of Paris, supposedly prepaid for the entire week. They arrived, tired but buzzing with excitement, eager to begin their extravagant adventure. The first sign something was amiss was when Ravenna tried to use her credit card for a small purchase, a silk scarf, at a high-end boutique near their hotel. Declined, the sales assistant said politely, her eyes scanning Ravenna's designer attire with a hint of suspicion. Ravenna, annoyed, scoffed, assuming it was a temporary banking glitch, perhaps due to international travel. Silly banks, she muttered, trying another card, and then another. All declined. Jasper, ever the optimist, ever reliant on Ravenna to handle the tiresome details of money, suggested they just use cash for a bit, then call the bank in the morning. Except, when they tried to withdraw cash from an ATM, that, too, was declined. Not just one card, but all of them. Their debit cards, their credit cards linked to the trust, even their supposedly private bank accounts which were, unbeknownst to them, largely funded by regular, large transfers from the trust. They were financially naked. Panic began to set in, a cold, creeping dread. They called their bank, initially met with confused customer service representatives who couldn't explain why their accounts showed zero balance or were frozen. It wasn't a glitch. It was a complete, deliberate shutdown. The hotel front desk then informed them, with an air of barely concealed disdain, that their booking, which was supposed to be fully paid, had suddenly been revoked due to a payment reversal. They were asked to settle their first night stay immediately, in cash, or leave. Their luggage was already in their room, and the thought of being stranded in a foreign city with nowhere to go filled them with terror. The shock on Ravenna's face must have been priceless, a vision I savored from afar. The smugness gone, replaced by growing horror, then incandescent rage. Jasper, who had always relied on Ravenna to handle the finances, who had never bothered to understand the intricacies of their wealth, was utterly bewildered, his face a mask of confusion and dawning fear. They were in a foreign country, thousands of miles from home, with no access to money, no working credit cards, and suddenly, no hotel room. The curated, picture-perfect vacation instantly collapsed into a nightmare of desperate phone calls and growing humiliation. They tried contacting friends, family, anyone who could wire them money, but it was late in Europe, and early morning back home, a time difference that compounded their misery. They were truly stranded, alone, and utterly helpless. I imagined the frantic calls, the disbelief, the dawning horror as reality set in. I knew they would try to call me, a desperate Hail Mary. My phone, which had been silent from them for weeks, suddenly began to ring incessantly. Dozens of missed calls from Jasper, then Ravenna, then Jasper again, their desperation palpable even through the silent vibrations. I let them ring. I watched the screen light up, a wry, almost triumphant smile on my lips. Let them sweat. Let them feel what it was like to be dismissed, to be helpless, to be cast aside, to be told they were financially irresponsible. The Zygarnik effect was now working on them with full force, the unfinished task of their grand vacation now a source of immense psychological discomfort, a gnawing void. The curiosity gap was filled with their sudden, brutal reality. They finally knew what had happened next. And it was exactly what they deserved. So where is my daughter-in-law who called me the maid now, you ask? And my silent son, her puppet? Well, the initial fallout was, as you can imagine, quite dramatic. They eventually managed to borrow enough money from a long-suffering friend, a former university acquaintance of Jasper's, I later learned, who was surprised they even remembered him, to buy economy-class tickets home, humiliated and utterly financially destitute. They arrived back in the dead of night, not to their sprawling mansion, which they quickly realized they could no longer afford and would soon have to put on the market, but to the harsh reality of their new circumstances. The shock of having to fly economy after years of first-class luxury was, I heard, almost as profound as the financial freeze itself. The trust remained frozen. Mr. Henderson, acting on my behalf, informed them that the accounts would remain inaccessible until a full audit was completed, and a new, more responsible structure for the trust was established, one that ensured its long-term viability and upheld the welfare of all beneficiaries, including its founder. This process, he explained with a perfectly polite but firm tone, would take time. A lot of time. And it would require their full cooperation, which meant submitting every financial record, every lavish receipt, every questionable investment, every hidden debt. It was an uncomfortable, utterly revealing process for them. Ravenna, initially, was furious, incandescent with rage. She tried to fight back, to threaten legal action against me, to defame me to anyone who would listen, calling me a spiteful, bitter old woman. She tried to rally her circle of friends to her side. But with no funds to hire a high-powered lawyer and a clear, ironclad legal document supporting my actions, her threats were empty, hollow echoes. The public shaming she had inflicted on me at the hospital now boomeranged back at her, tenfold. Her friends, who had flocked to her for her extravagant parties, her designer gifts, her lavish trips, quickly evaporated when they realized her money train had derailed. She was forced to get a job, a real job, for the first time in her adult life. She started as a sales assistant in a high-end boutique, ironically, a place where she used to spend thousands without a second thought, treating the staff with condescension. I heard through the grapevine that she struggled immensely, that she complained constantly about the long hours, the low pay, the indignity of serving customers. The designer handbags and lavish vacations were replaced by a modest paycheck and the crushing weight of responsibility, a reality she had never known. She learned the hard way that true friendship is not bought with lavish gifts. And Jasper. My son. The silence from him was finally broken, but not in the way I ever wanted, not with an apology or a loving plea. He was initially angry, then utterly lost, bewildered by the sudden collapse of his gilded cage. He called me repeatedly, his voice a mix of desperation and betrayal. Mother, how could you do this to us? Do you know what this means? We have nothing. Our lives are ruined. How can you be so cruel? I listened, my heart aching, a deep, familiar pain, but I remained firm, unwavering. Jasper, I finally said, my voice calm, steady, I did this because you left me no choice. You allowed Ravenna to treat me with contempt, to drain the very legacy your father and I built with our blood and sweat, and when I needed help, when my very health was on the line, you turned your back. This is not about revenge, it's about consequences. It's about you finally learning what it means to stand on your own 2 feet, to truly value what you have, and who built it. He was forced to find a job as well, in a field he had previously dismissed as beneath him, something in logistics, a far cry from the executive position he held through family connections. He started at the bottom, working his way up, his pride taking a severe beating. It was difficult, humbling work, requiring long hours and genuine effort, something he hadn't experienced in years. I heard he would often work late, trying to make ends meet, trying to provide for his family in a way he never truly had before. He and Ravenna had to downsize drastically, selling the mansion and moving into a small, rented apartment in a modest neighborhood. The children, Lily and Tom, were initially confused and upset by the sudden change in their lifestyle, the absence of their private tutors and their expensive toys, but they adapted. And perhaps, for the first time, they saw their parents as real people, not just conduits for endless luxury, struggling and striving, just like everyone else. They visited me more often, sometimes alone, seeking comfort and stability I could now freely offer. The lesson they learned was harsh, painful, but ultimately, I believe, profound. They learned the true value of money, not as an endless supply, but as something earned through hard work and managed with responsibility. They learned about gratitude, or the painful lack thereof, the bitter taste of ingratitude. They learned that actions have consequences, that burning bridges, especially with the people who built your foundation, can leave you stranded in the wilderness, naked to the world. For me, the peace I found was immeasurable, a deep, profound calm settling over my soul. The surgery recovery was difficult, a long and arduous path, but the emotional scars began to heal, replaced by a quiet strength. I regained my power, my dignity, my sense of self. The trust is now being restructured, with me firmly at the helm, ensuring that the assets are protected for future generations, not squandered on frivolous whims. I am ensuring that Lily and Tom will have a genuine safety net, a true foundation for their lives, not a bottomless pit of unchecked indulgence. I see Jasper sometimes, when he visits with the children. He's quieter now, more thoughtful, a shadow of the entitled man he once was. He doesn't call as often, but when he does, there's a new respect in his voice, a hint of the son I once knew, the young man who once clutched my hand. We are slowly, painstakingly, rebuilding a fragile bridge. Ravenna, I rarely see. She avoids me, which is just fine. Our paths no longer intertwine. Never test anyone's patience to its limits, especially not the patience of a mother who has given her all, who has sacrificed and endured. You never know what forgotten strengths, what secret trump cards, or what steely resolve lies beneath the surface of a seemingly quiet person pushed too far. Sometimes, the quietest people hold the most powerful secrets, and they are not afraid to use them when all else fails, when their heart is broken, and their legacy is threatened. Are there any other mothers out there who have forgotten themselves for the sake of their children's happiness, only to be taken for granted and cast aside? My channel has many similar stories of life lessons learned the hard way, of power reclaimed, and of finding peace after betrayal. If my story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to my channel, turning on notifications so you don't miss another powerful tale, and sharing your own troubles and thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences matter, and we can learn so much from each other.